Hello. All right. Today we will be going over Basic CSS on Free Code Camp. What's up, Jake? I am just getting something ready to drink here. Let's see if we can make this smaller. Don't think we can make this smaller at all. All right. Basic CSS. Let's learn how to change the color of text. We can do this by changing the style of our H2 element. Right here. The property that is responsible for the color of an element text is the color style property. Here's how you would set your H2 element's text color to blue. Style equals quotation color blue and blue text. Note that it's good practice to end inline style declarations with a semicolon. Change your H2 element's style so that its text color is red. Boom. Let's run the tests. With CSS, there are hundreds of CSS properties that you can use to change the way an element looks on your page. When you entered H2 style color equals red, you were styling that individual H2 element with Inline CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. That's one way to specify the style of an element, but there's a better way to apply CSS. At the top of your code, create a style block like this. Did that a little backwards, but that's okay. Inside that style block, you can create a CSS selector for all H2 elements. For example, if you wanted all H2 elements to be red, you would add a style rule that looks like this. We can even get rid of this to show that it still works. Note that it's important to have both opening and closing curly braces around each element's style rules. You also need to make sure that your element's style definition is between the opening and closing style tags. Finally, be sure to add a semicolon to the end of each of your element's style rules. Delete your H2 element style attribute, we've done that, but instead create a CSS style block. Add the necessary CSS to turn all H2 elements blue. So we're back to blue. Run our code here. we've passed. Basic CSS, use a CSS class to style an element. Classes are reusable styles that can be added to HTML elements. Here's an example CSS class declaration. So we have one for blue text that makes the color of it blue. You can see that we've created a CSS class called blue text within the style tag. You can apply a class to an HTML element like this. Class equals, and then you just say blue text. I used to get confused because in these you start it with the dot, or if you're making IDs, the hashtag. But when you're calling them, you don't add those. Okay, so note that in your CSS style element, class names start with a period. In your HTML elements class attribute, the class name does not include the period. Well, there you go. Alright, now our instructions. Inside your style element, change the H2 selector to red text. And we'll change the color to red, and then it wants us to add this class to the H2. Oh, see, there I go again. And we should be able to run. And we've passed, so we can continue. Maybe later. Classes allow you to use the same CSS styles on multiple HTML elements. You can see this by applying a red text class to the first P element. So it wants us to do it to this paragraph element, red text. Font size is controlled by the font size CSS property, like this. Inside the style tag that contains your red text class, create an entry for P elements and set the font size to 16 pixels. We don't need a save. Make sure that's working. Alright, so we got 16 pixels. We should be able to run the code and continue on. Basic CSS, set the font family of an element. You can set which font an element should use by using the font family property. For example, if you wanted to set your H2 element's font to sans serif, you would use the following CSS. Make all of your P elements use the monospace font. Oh, no. Monospace. Run the tests. We've passed. In addition to specifying common fonts that are found on most operating systems, we can also specify non-standard custom web fonts for use on our website. There are various sources for web fonts on the internet, but for this example, we'll focus on the Google Fonts library. Google Fonts is a free library of web fonts that you can use in your CSS by referencing the font's URL. So let's go ahead and import and apply a Google font. Note that if Google is blocked in your country, you will need to skip this challenge. To import a Google font, you can copy the font's URL from the Google Fonts library and then paste it in your HTML. For this challenge, we'll import the lobster font. Slow down, bud. To do this, copy the following code snippet and paste it into the top of your code editor before the opening style element. Gotcha. Now you can use the lobster font in your CSS by using lobster as the family name, as in the following example: font family, family name, generic name. The generic name is optional and is a fallback font in case the other specified font is not available. This is covered in the next challenge. Family names are case sensitive and need to be wrapped in quotes if there is a space in the name. For example, you need quotes to use the Open Sans font, but not to use the lobster font. Create a font family CSS rule that uses the lobster font and ensure that it will be applied to your H2 element. Use an H2 CSS selector to change the font. Alright. Just wanted to be sure, so let's make this lobster font. So this would be font family lobster. And we can do this. Lobster font. Boom. Oh, it wants us to use the H2. Alright, well. That's fine. Boom. Basic CSS. Specify how fonts should degrade. There are several default fonts that are available in all browsers. These generic font families include monospace, serif, and sans serif. When one font isn't available, you can tell the browser to degrade to another font. For example, if you wanted an element to use the Helvetica font, but degrade to the sans serif font when Helvetica wasn't available, you will specify it as follows. I don't think I've ever said that word out loud, even though I've seen it so many times. Generic font family names are not case sensitive. Also, they do not need quotes because they are CSS keywords. To begin with, apply the monospace font to the H2 element so that it now has two fonts, lobster and monospace. So we're gonna do comma monospace. In the last challenge, you imported the lobster font using the link tag. Now comment out that import of the lobster font using the HTML comments you learned before from the Google font so that it isn't available anymore. Notice how your H2 element degrades to the monospace font. So we're going to add an HTML comment here, and we'll end it the end of this line. And we can see that it's monospace. We could even take this out to show the difference. Note, if you have the lobster font installed on your computer, you won't see the degradation because your browser is able to find the font. I do know CSS. I'm just going through this for fun. Basic CSS, size your images. CSS has a property called width that controls an element's width. Just like with fonts, we'll use px to specify the image's width in pixels. For example, if we wanted to create a CSS class called larger image that gave HTML elements a width of 500 pixels, we'd use this right here. Create a class called smaller image. And use it to resize the image so that it's only 100 pixels wide. Oh. Due to browser implementation differences, you may need to be at 100% zoom to pass the test on this challenge. Oh. We need to give this our class. Let's see here. We'll reset this just in case. Run our tests. We've passed. All right, basic CSS, add borders around your elements. CSS borders have properties like style, color, and width. I mean, that would depend on how well you did. You could definitely make, you could make that if you tried real hard and you were good, for sure. Basic CSS, add borders around your elements. CSS borders have properties like style, color, and width. For example, if we wanted to create a red 5-pixel border around an HTML element, we could use this class. Thin red border. I wouldn't call that thin, but there you have it. Create a class called thick green border. This class should add a 10-pixel solid green border around an HTML element. Apply the class to your cat photo. Remember that your class can apply multiple classes, or remember that you can apply multiple classes to an element using its class attribute by separating each class name with a space. Alright, so we'll just copy this to make it easier so we don't have to type. It wants green. No, I didn't, because I started with CSS and so there's like, I don't know, there's like art to it almost. It's creative, so I had fun with it. I was bored of like the more advanced stuff, like learning JavaScript and learning actual like programming. But after you know, build a few apps, you're gonna use those things, and you'll, you know, if you just stick to it, you'll learn it. And the nice thing is a lot of the stuff that you learn in JavaScript can be applied to other languages as well. It's just different syntax. But yeah, it can be dry sometimes. Some of the things, some articles and stuff, I don't know, when I learned it, it wasn't, there's way more articles and content out there right now than when I learned. So I would say that you could probably find somebody that keeps your interest if you looked hard enough. All right, anyways, 10 pixels, solid. And we need to apply this to our image. right here. Yeah, that's a tough one. Well, here's the thing about programming. In my opinion, is it's great no matter what you want to get into, because you can use your programming to build your real estate site, or to help you research real estate. So you can use your programming skills, you know, for whatever you love. That's nice. No? Okay. We passed. Yeah, man. Honestly, I don't like to tell people what to do and stuff, or you know, but if you, I would suggest anybody learn to program. I think that it's a great skill to have. Even this stuff here, I mean, you could find jobs doing just HTML, CSS, and that, you know, most of it came out years ago. All depends. Alright, basic CSS, add rounded corners with border radius. Your cat photo currently has sharp corners. We can round out those corners with a CSS property called border-radius. You can specify a border radius with pixels. Give your cat photo a border radius of 10 pixels. This challenge allows for multiple possible solutions. For example, you may add border radius to either... Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't wasting my time here. Border radius 10 pixels, and now it's all fancy. And I believe that's it, so let's run our tests, and we've passed. On to making circular images with a border radius. And that's really easy. We can just take this and make it 50%. That's even more fancy. What do you do right now, Twisted? Thanks for the follow, by the way. Basic CSS, give a background color to a div element. You can set an element's background color with the background color property. For example, if you wanted an element's background color to be green, you'd put this within your style element. Green background color green. Create a class called silver background with the background color of silver. Assign this class to your div element. Silver background color silver. Gotcha. Assign this class to your div element. Silver background. Look at that. Basic CSS, set the ID of an element. In addition to classes, each HTML element can also have an ID attribute. There are several benefits to using ID attributes. You can use an ID to style a single element, and later you'll learn that you can use them to select and modify specific elements with JavaScript. ID attributes should be unique. Browsers won't enforce this, but it is widely agreed upon best practice, so please don't give more than one element the same ID attribute. Here's an example of how you would give your H2 element the ID of a cat photo app. Give your form element the ID of cat photo form. Right here. ID equals, oh no, cat photo form, and we'll run our tests, and they're happy. We'll continue on. Basic CSS, use an ID attribute to style an element. One cool thing about ID attributes is that, like classes, you can style them using CSS. However, an ID is not reusable and should only be applied to one element. An ID also has a higher specificity importance than a class, so if both are applied to the same element and have conflicting styles, the styles of the ID will be applied. Here's an example of how you can take your element with the ID attribute of cat photo element and give it the background color of green in your style element. Note that inside your style element, you always reference classes by putting a period in front of their names, and you always reference IDs by putting a hashtag in front of their names. Try giving your form, which now has the ID attribute of cat photo form, a green background. So up here we would say cat photo form background color green, and that should do it. Basic CSS, adjust the padding of an element. Now let's put our cat photo app away for a little while and learn more about styling HTML. You may have already noticed this, but all HTML elements are essentially little rectangles. 3 important properties control the space that surrounds each HTML element: padding, margin, and border. An element's padding controls the amount of space between the element's content and its border. Here we can see that the blue box and the red box are nested within the yellow box. Note that the red box has more padding than the blue box. So more space in between the padding and the border, or the text and the border, less space here. When you increase the blue box's padding, it will increase the distance between the text and the border around it. Change the padding of your blue box to match that of your red box. So we want to find the blue box selector. This has a padding of 10 right now. The red box has 20, so let's change this to 20 as well, so they're the same, and run our tests. Basic CSS. Adjust the margin of an element. An element's margin controls the amount of space between an element's border and surrounding elements. Here, we can see that the blue box and the red box are nested within the yellow box. Note that the red box has a bigger margin than the blue box, making it appear smaller. When you increase the blue box's margin, it will increase the distance between its border and surrounding elements. Change the margin of the blue box to match that of the red box. So we have 10 pixels for our margin right now. The red box has 20, so let's make this 20, and boom. Run the tests. We've passed. Moving on. Add a negative margin to an element. An element's margin controls the amount of space between an element's border and surrounding elements. If you set an element's margin to a negative value, the elements will grow larger. Try to set the margin to a negative value like the one up for the red box. Change the margin of the blue box to negative 15 pixels, so it fills the entire horizontal width of the yellow box around it. So we'll find this, and again we're just making it match 15 pixels. Oh, pixels are already there. And there we go. Fancy. Basic CSS. Add different padding to each side of an element. Sometimes you will want to customize an element so that it has different amounts of padding on each of its sides. CSS allows you to control the padding of all 4 individual sides of an element with the padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and padding left properties. Give the blue box a padding of 40 pixels on its top side and left side, but only 20 pixels on its bottom and right sides. So we're going to copy this just to make life easier. Okay. I don't want the last. So give the blue box a padding of 40 pixels on its top and left. Top and left. So this is, it just wanted us to copy it. I see. Alright. Well, we've done that. This could be harder. Basic CSS, add different margins to each side of an element. Sometimes you will want to customize an element so that it has a different margin on each of its sides. CSS allows you to control the margin of all 4 individual sides of an element with the margin top, right, bottom, and left properties. Give the blue box a margin of 40 pixels on its top and left side, but only 20 pixels on its bottom and right side. So again, we're going to copy the example from here and paste it here because that's exactly what it wants. Let's double check. Top and left 40, bottom and right 20. Correct. We've passed the test. Basic CSS. Use clockwise notation to specify the padding of an element. Instead of specifying an element's padding, top, right, bottom, and left properties individually, you can specify them all in one line like this. Padding 10 pixels. Yeah. These 4 values work like a clock, top, right, bottom, left, and will produce the exact same result as using the side-specific padding instructions. Use clockwise notation to give the blue box class a padding of 40 pixels on its top and left side, but only 20 on its bottom and right side. So again, we just want to copy this, I'm pretty sure. So like it's saying, this is padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. Oh, it changed it on us, so we can't do that. I see. You want me to do the opposite. Gotcha. All right, let me read this. All right, so these 240. Top and left are 40. And then the bottom and right, these 2 are 20. All right, you tricked me. You got me. No more copy and pasting. All right. Let's try this again, but with margin this time. Instead of specifying an element's margin, top, right, bottom, and left properties individually, you can specify them the same way shown here. These 4 values work like a clock, top, right, bottom, left, and will produce the exact same result as using the side-specific margin instructions. Use clockwise notation to give an element with the blue box class a margin of 40 pixels on its top and left side, so top, only 20 pixels on its bottom and right side, so 20 pixel, 20 pixel, 40 pixel. Oh, margin. Basic CSS. Use attribute selectors to style elements. You have been given ID or class attribute. You have been giving ID or class attributes to elements that you wish to specifically style. These are known as ID and class selectors. There are other CSS selectors you can use to select custom groups of elements to style. Let's bring out cat photo app again and to practice using CSS selectors. For this challenge, you will use the attribute value attribute selector to style the checkboxes in the cat photo app. This selector matches and styles elements with a specific attribute value. For example, the below code changes the margins of all elements with the attribute of type and a corresponding value of radio. So all radio buttons will have the margins of 20 pixels, 0 pixels, 20 pixels, 0 pixels. Use the type attribute selector. Try to give the checkboxes in cat photo app a top margin of 10 pixels and a bottom margin of 15. So we're gonna start at the bottom here, and type equals checkbox, and it wants 10 pixels, 15 pixels for the bottom. And let's run the tests. We've passed. Alrighty. I want to put this way over here. I'm hidden. It's great. What's going on in Discord? I'm live. Great. Perfect. We're jamming today. Taking a little short break here. And then we'll continue on understanding absolute versus relative units. Oh, here we go. Basic CSS, understanding absolute versus relative units. Last several challenges all set an element's margin or padding with pixels px. Pixels are a type of length unit, which is what tells the browser how to size or space an item. In addition to px, CSS has a number of different length unit options that you can use. The two main types of length units are absolute and relative. Absolute units tie to physical units of length. For example, inch and a millimeter refer to inches and millimeters, respectively. Absolute length units approximate the actual measurement on a screen, but there are some differences depending on a screen's resolution. Relative units, such as EM or REM, are relative to another length value. For example, EM is based on the size of an element's font. You use it to set the font size property itself. It's relative to the parent's font size. Note: there are several relative unit options that are tied to the size of the viewport. They are covered in the Responsive Web Design Principles section. Let's add a padding property to the element with class redbox and set it to 1.5 EM. Well, it's ready for us. Padding property and 1.5 EM. All Alright, basic CSS. Style the HTML body element. Now let's start fresh and talk about CSS inheritance. The best. Every HTML page has a body element. We can prove that the body element exists here by giving it a background color of black. Body, boxy, background color black. I believe that's all it wants us to do. Now we've proven that every HTML page has a body element, and that its body element can also be styled with CSS. Remember, you can style your body element just like any other HTML element, and all of your other elements will inherit your body element's styles. First, create a H1 element with the text "Hello World." Hello World? Oh my. Then let's give all elements on your page the color of green by adding color green to your body elements. Style declaration. Finally, give your body element the font family of monospace to your body element style declaration. So body is like the default, like browser has some settings and stuff, but when you put stuff here, and that's what we're going to learn, we'll probably overwrite these with things. So let's run our tests. We've passed. Prioritize one style over another. Sometimes your HTML elements will receive multiple styles that conflict with one another. For example, your H1 element can't be both green and pink at the same time. Let's see what happens when we create a class that makes text pink, then apply it to an element. Will our class override the body element's color green CSS property? Create a CSS class called pink text that gives the element the color pink. Give your H1 element the class of pink. So we'll add this and it should overwrite. Ooh. Pink text. Our pink text class overrode our body element's CSS declaration. We just proved that our classes will override the body element's CSS. So the next logical question is, what can we do to override our pink text class? Create an additional CSS class called blue text that gives an element the color blue. Make sure it's below your pink text class declaration. Apply the blue text to your H1 class in addition to your pink text class, and let's see which one wins. Applying multiple class attributes to an HTML class element or HTML element is done with a space between them like this. Class 1, class 2. Doesn't matter which order the classes are listed in the HTML element. However, the order of the class declaration in the style section are what is important. The second declaration will always take precedence over the first because blue text is declared second. It overrides the attributes of pink text. So because this is second, we took it out and we put it over here, it will stay pink. And if we cut this and put it on top, it will turn blue. So I think we're good. Run the tests. Basic CSS. Override class declarations by styling ID attributes. We just proved that browsers read CSS from top to bottom. That means that in the event of a conflict, the browser will use whichever CSS declaration came last. But we're not done yet. There are other ways that you can override CSS. Do you remember ID attributes? Let's override your pink text and blue text classes and make your H1 element orange by giving the H1 element an ID and then styling that ID. Give your H1 element the ID attribute of orange text. Remember, ID styles look like this. Although this is giving it a class name that's not very good for being an ID. That's okay. Leave the blue text and pink text classes on your H1 element. Create a CSS declaration for your orange text ID in your style element. Here's an example of what that looks like. It doesn't matter whether you declare this CSS above or below pink text class, since ID attribute will always take precedence. So yeah, and we can do that as an example. If we put it up here, orange text, color orange, boom. Run the tests. We've passed. Basic CSS override class declarations with inline styles. So we've proven that ID declarations override class declarations, regarding of where they are declared in your style element CSS. There are other ways that you can override CSS. Do you remember inline styles? Use an inline style to try to make our H1 element white. Remember, inline styles look like this. Leave the blue text and pink text classes on your H1 element. So we're going to use inline style equals color white. Did it want it? Yep. So inline style has precedence over ID, has precedence over classes. The bottommost class has precedence over anything above it. Okay. Passed. Basic CSS. Override all other styles by using important. Yay, we just proved that inline styles will override all of the CSS declarations in your style element. But wait, there's one last way to override CSS. This is the most powerful method of all. But before we do it, let's talk about why you would ever want to override CSS. In many situations, you will use CSS libraries. These may accidentally override your own CSS, so when you absolutely need to be sure that an element has a specific CSS, you can use exclamation important. Let's go all the way back to our pink text class declaration. Remember that our pink text class was overridden by subsequent class declarations, ID declarations, and inline styles. Let's add the keyword important to your pink text element's color declaration to make 100% sure that your H1 element will be pink. An example of how to do this: color red important. So it's white now because the local style, but once we add this important, this one becomes activated. Run the tests. Basic CSS, use hex code for specific colors. Did you know that there are other ways to represent colors in CSS? One of these ways is called hexadecimal code, or hex code for short. We usually use decimals or base 10 numbers, which use the Alright, we usually use decimals or base 10 numbers, which use the symbols 0 to 9 for each digit. Hexadecimals, or hex, are base 16 numbers. This means it uses 16 distinct symbols. Like decimals, the symbols 0 through 9 represent the values 0 to 9. Then A, B, C, D, E, F represent the values 10 to 15. Altogether, 0 to F can represent a digit in hexadecimal, giving us 16 total possible values. You can find more information about hexadecimal numbers here. Where does this go? Wikipedia? In CSS, we can use 6 hexadecimal digits to represent colors, 2 each for the red, green, and blue components. For example, hashtag 060 is black and is also the lowest possible value. You can find more information about RGB color system here. Again, Wikipedia. Replace the word black in our body element's background color with the hex code of black. That's one too many zeros. So these first two are red, green, blue, and I'm sure it's going to have us do this, but 0 is the lowest, and F is white. That's the highest. I like this. What's this? Alright. Alright, basic CSS, use hex code to mix colors. To review, hex codes use 6 hexadecimal digits to represent colors, 2 each for red, green, and blue components. From these 3 pure colors, red, green, and blue, we can vary the amounts of each to create over 16 million other colors. For example, orange is pure red mixed with some green and no blue. In hex code, this translates to being FFA500. The digit 0 is the lowest number in the hex code and represents a complete absence of color. The digit F is the highest number in the hex code and represents the maximum possible brightness. Replace the color words in your style element with their correct hex codes. Okay. Dodger blue. Green, orange, red. Nice. Basic CSS. Use abbreviated hex code. Many people feel overwhelmed by the possibilities of more than 16 million colors, and it's difficult to remember hex code. Fortunately, you can shorten it. For example, red's hex code FF0000 can be shortened to F00. This shortened form gives 1 digit for red, 1 digit for green, and 1 digit for blue. This reduces the total number of possible colors to around 4,000, but browsers will interpret FF00 and F00 is exactly the same color. Go ahead and try using the abbreviated hex codes to color the correct elements. So cyan, and this has it, so we can triple click these, which is nice. Green and red and fuchsia. Off the hook. Basic CSS. Use RGB values to color elements. Another way you can represent colors in CSS is by using RGB values. The RGB value for black looks like this. RGB 0, 0, 0. The RGB value for white looks like this. RGB 255, 255, and 255. Instead of using 6 hexadecimal digits like you do with hex code, with RGB you specify the brightness of each color with a number between 0 and 255. If you do the math, the 2 digits for one color equals 16 times 16, which gives us 256 total values. So RGB, which stores counting from 0, has the exact same number of possible values as hex code. Here's an example of how you change the body background to orange using its RGB code. Let's replace the hex code in our body element's background color with RGB value for black. So we'll triple click this, backspace, backspace, RGB 0, 0, 0. Run our tests. We've passed. Basic CSS. Use RGB to mix colors. Just like with hex code, you can mix colors in RGB by using combinations of different values. Replace the hex codes in our style element with their correct RGB values. So for blue, we want this, and this. For orchid, I want this. And for Sienna, I want this. Okay. Let's run the tests. We've passed. Ooh, basic CSS. Use CSS variables to change several elements at once. CSS variables are a powerful way to change many CSS style properties at once by changing only one value. Follow the instructions below to see how changing just 3 values can change the styling of many elements. In the Penguin class, change the black value to gray, and the gray value to white, and the yellow value to orange. I've actually never used these. These are relatively new-ish. Me, at least. So cool. Penguin skin, penguin belly, penguin beak. And then to use them, you just like that. It's weird that you can okay. I'm guessing like it only works if it's within, like you don't get access to, or do you? What did I take away here? What if I put this down here? Or down here? Yeah, it doesn't look like you get the colors. Just get it from body. Where's body at? Yeah, I think right here. So if we change this to red. No, that's not it. What are you talking about, dude? Where's he gonna? No, I want to put it down here. I want to inspect. Okay. So it doesn't matter where you, yeah, that still seems to be working. All right. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Cool. So it doesn't seem to matter where you set these. Like, I wonder if we can hey, it's so cute that way anyway. Okay, that doesn't work. What if we say body? That works. But we put it here because these are only for the penguin. Hence the dash penguin dash whatever. Got it. All right. So, and then penguin class changed the black value to gray and the gray value to white. Gray. White. Nope. White and orange. Okay. Cute. Basic CSS, create a custom CSS variable. To create a CSS variable, you just need to give it a name with 2 dashes in front of it and assign it to a value like this. This will create a variable named penguin skin and assign it the value of gray. Now you can use that variable elsewhere in your CSS to change the value of other elements to gray. In the penguin class, create a variable named -- penguin skin and give it a value of gray. Penguin skin gray. Okay, we passed. Basic CSS, use a custom CSS variable. After you create your variable, you can assign it its value to other CSS properties by referencing the name you gave it. Background variable, and you reference it with the name. This will change the background of whatever element you are targeting to gray because that is the value of penguin skin variable. Note that the styles will not be applied unless the variable names are an exact match. Apply the penguin skin variable to the background property of the penguin top, penguin bottom, right hand, and left hand. Okay, so it's no, var -- penguin skin. And we'll just copy this and paste it wherever that it wants us to. Boom. Cool beans. Oh no. Basic CSS, attach a fallback value to a CSS variable. When you're using your variable as a CSS property value, you can attach a fallback value that your page will revert to if for some reason it can't get your variable to work. It could be that someone is using an older browser that hasn't yet adopted CSS variables, or perhaps their device doesn't support the value you gave the variable. Here's how you do it. Variable whatever, and okay, I see. So that's what I was doing before. This will set the background to black if there's a problem with your variable. Note that this can be useful for debugging. Add a fallback value of black to the background property of penguin top and penguin bottom classes. Note, the above style will be applied because of a typo in the CSS variable name. Oh, I see. They've misspelled it here, so we're giving it a thing to fix all the errors. A backup. Close. I think that was it. So we run the tests. We're good. Let's see here. It is really cold in my room, so I'll be right back. All right. When you create a variable, it becomes available for you to use inside the element in which you create it. It also becomes available within any elements nested within it. This effect is known as cascading. Because of cascading, CSS variables are often defined in the root element. You can think of the root element as a container for your entire HTML document in the same way that an HTML element is a container for the body element. By creating your variables in root, they will be available throughout the whole web page. Find a variable named penguin belly in the root selector and give it the value of pink. You can then see how the value will cascade down to change the value to pink anywhere that the variable is used. So okay. Perfect. Basic CSS. Change a variable for a specific area. When you create your variables in root, they will set the value of that variable for the whole page. You can then override these variables by setting them again within a specific element. Change the value of penguin belly to white in the penguin class. So we make penguin belly here. Oh, wow. Belly here, and we set it to white. Nice. So we can run. Oh my god. Basic CSS. Use a media query to change a variable. CSS variables can simplify the way you use media queries. For instance, when your screen is smaller or larger than your media query breakpoint, you can change the value of a variable, and it will apply its style wherever it is used. In the root selector of the media query, change it so that penguin size is redefined and given a value of 200 pixels. Also redefine penguin skin and give it a value of black. Then resize the preview to see this change in action. Okay, so we're in the root of the media query for the max width of 350 pixels. And it wants us to change it so penguin size is 200 pixels, which makes it smaller. And if we test this, we can see that in action. It's adorable. Cool. Run the tests. You should reassign the ping to what? Oh, I didn't finish. All right. Now also redefine penguin skin and give it a value of black. All right. And then we can resize and it'll change that color. Back and forth. Back and forth forever. Wow. Okay. Introduction to the applied visual design challenges. So I believe that we're done. We're done. 2:14. All right. Cool stuff. Cool stuff today. I'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. EST, and we'll learn Applied Visual Design, Introduction to the Applied Visual Design Challenges. All right. Thanks again for everybody that came by. Thanks for the follow, Twisted. I'll be back tonight, 8 p.m. EST for some Clash Royale. Hope to see you there.